Marvel's Spider-Man is one of the best superhero video games I've ever played. It's an exciting, expansive adventure with cinematic story, escalating action, and personal stakes. Basically, it's everything you could ever want in a Spider-Man game. If you've played any of Rocksteady's Batman Arkham games, that's probably the easiest comparison point here. Insomniac Games has created an almost identical experience with Spider-Man, but instead of cruising around Gotham in the Batmobile, you're swinging through New York City with web shooters. You primarily play as Peter Parker, who's been fighting crime as Spider-Man for 8 years when this game begins. The time jump is a really smart decision because it basically unshackles us from the traditional narratives that we've already seen of Peter Parker as a high schooler or even as a college student. He's out of college now, he's working as a scientist at a lab, he's living in a crappy apartment all by himself. This gets rid of the pesky origin story that everybody already knows and just lets you jump into the action as an experienced Spider-Man who already has a ton of skills at his disposal. Peter is the main protagonist, but there are a couple of other playable characters as well. One of them is Mary Jane Watson, who's now working as a reporter at the Daily Bugle. The two of them have some baggage as the story begins, and as the action unfolds, their partnership becomes increasingly important. The story begins with a raid on Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, with Spider-Man fighting his way through dozens of henchmen and multiple floors of a skyscraper to get to him. Spidey spent years trying to put Fisk behind bars, but when he finally does in the first few minutes of the game, it opens up a power vacuum in New York that's arguably worse than Fisk's Iron Rule. A mysterious group called the Demons begins battling for Fisk's territory, led by Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, a seemingly kind man who runs the feast shelters where Aunt May works. With Norman Osborn gearing up for re-election as the mayor of New York City, he hires Silver Sable and her team of mercenaries as personal protection. Sable's hired guns and Mr. Negative's demons constitute a majority of the low-level bad guys that you'll fight throughout the story. But as revealed in one of the game's trailers, you'll also fight the Sinister Six, which are here comprised of Electro, Rhino, Vulture, Scorpion, Mr. Negative, and a sixth mystery member that I won't spoil, who's pulling all the strings. Since Peter Parker is a science genius, Spidey has all sorts of cool gadgets that help out a ton in combat, and give him the ability to shoot webs simultaneously in every direction, create holographic versions of himself, and even web bombs, which tie up multiple enemies at once. Further tapping into that science genius angle, the game also gives you some mini challenges to solve tech problems, like fixing a robotic arm by rerouting circuitry. It's a puzzle aspect that's leaned on sparingly, but I appreciated the way it puts Peter Parker's intelligence front and center, while most of the game relies more on combat and lighthearted quips. As you might expect, you can unlock tons of additional challenges as the game goes on. There are stations sprinkled throughout the city in which Black Cat and Oscorp give you small tasks to accomplish, resulting in experience points which can be used to upgrade suits or gadgets. Years ago, Peter Parker even left backpacks scattered throughout New York with tracking beacons on them, and finding those also increases your points and helps you in your fight against the city's villains. I cannot stress this enough, swinging through the city is amazing. This is where the real magic of the game comes in. There are a bunch of recognizable landmarks like Grand Central Station and Central Park that anybody who's ever been to New York will notice, but there are also a lot of nice nods to the larger Marvel universe, with places like Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum and the Avengers Tower in there as well. In terms of downsides, one of the only negative aspects of this game for me is that even with the high range of combat options, a lot of the fights start to feel the same after a while. The developers did a great job of making sure you can use different elements of your environment in the fights, but still, after 7 or 8 hours of gameplay, eventually it starts to wear thin a little bit. To be fair though, the combat in almost all of these types of games eventually begins to feel the same, so the problem is not necessarily exclusive to this title. Marvel's Spider-Man is a terrific addition to the superhero video game canon. It's an addicting, thrilling experience that already has me itching to jump back in and swing through the city once again.